Tonight's lesson is more along the line of just instruction than it is anything else. I'll have to tell you that quite a number of years ago, when I was teaching in Vienna, Austria, I had various lessons on the life of Christ for the students, and many of them were Muslim students. And I chose to devote some time just to the miracles of Christ. And this particular sermon was really in the form of a lecture that took the whole hour. We are not going to do that tonight, just to relieve your anxiety. We'll cut it down to about a 30-minute sermon. But this is designed primarily to get us to see something about the unique character of the miracles of Christ. They're very, very interesting. And sometimes when we kind of stand back and look at them as miracles rather than the individual miracles, we come up with some very interesting sidelights about these various workings of Christ. In John the 3rd chapter, Jesus spoke to a man by the name of Nicodemus. Nicodemus came to Jesus by night, and Nicodemus praised Christ for the fact that he was a miracle worker. He said, "No one can do the things that you do except God be with him." And so he attached the idea of the presence of God onto this whole idea of the miracles or the great works that Jesus did. Now, we really need to see the miracles as an integral part of the message of Christ. Why do I say that? Well, because the miracles did not set themselves off aside or apart from the message of Christ. They were an integral part of what he was saying. What was that? He was telling them, I am the Son of God. I am the one who is on an equality with God. I am the one who is God in the flesh. Now, the miracles became part of that because they bespoke exactly the same thing. They told people, as Nicodemus said to Jesus, no one can do these things that you're doing except God be with him. And so the teachings of Christ and the miracles of Christ must be taken together. We must understand them as a part of his overall mission in the world. Well, this brings up the question about what is a miracle. We use this word very loosely in common conversation. We've had the birth of a child here just a couple of weeks ago, and we think of how wonderful that is. And we have twin girls here. We think of how wonderful this all of this is. And people talk sometimes about the miracle of birth. Well, no, it isn't a miracle in the biblical sense of the word. It's only a great happening. It's a great and wonderful thing. It brings great happiness to parents. It brings great appreciation and awe to all of us when we think of the birth of a child. But the miracles in the Bible are really a circumvention of the natural order of things. It isn't, well, it was a miracle. My husband, my wife, my friend was very, very sick, and we took that person to the doctor, and it just looked like it was going to be so terrible and so forth, but just miraculously, he finally got all right. Well, that isn't the biblical idea of a miracle. It's a wonderful thing, and I don't for a moment discount the idea of God answering our prayers for the health and the recovery of people. But when we come to the biblical idea of miracles, it isn't just a wonderful deed. It isn't just the birth of a baby. Instead, it's a circumvention of the natural order of things. Now, what I mean by that is, for example, when Jesus calmed the storm, that was not an answer to prayer. That was an absolute miracle that he worked, so that the disciples looked at this and they said, my, even the winds and the waves obey his voice. And so you see, that is a circumvention or a setting aside of the natural order of things for just a moment. A fellow by the name of C.S. Lewis, if you've never read any of his books, you can pick just about any one you want and read it, and you will benefit greatly from it. He was a great author. He's dead now. But the interesting thing is that C.S. Lewis used to be an atheist. And as he began studying, particularly the miracles, he wrote a book on miracles. Not any particular miracle of Christ, but just on the idea of the supernatural. He made one little statement in the Bible, in the book, which I felt was a very, very biblical statement to be found by him. He says, a miracle is the interference with nature by a supernatural power. The interference of nature by a supernatural power. And so the nature of the biblical miracle primarily is that something took place that was against the rules of nature, against the laws of nature. To believe in God now is to believe in miracles, or the possibility of miracles, I should say. If we believe that God exists, and we believe that He is a powerful God, then there's nothing inconsistent here for us to think in terms of the fact that as a powerful God, as Creator God, He can work miracles. And these miracles do set aside the normal course of nature, and something takes place that would not have taken place had it not been for this intervention. Now, God doesn't live in our world. He lives in eternity. He is not bound by the laws of nature or anything like that. He has all power, and the Bible teaches that over and over. And so this is not an unusual idea or an unusual thing to think in terms of God as one who performed miracles. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, performing miracles. And in John chapter 10, Jesus was discussing some of these things with some of these people, and He said, believe me for my work's sake. Now, that's an important statement because it says that the miracles had a very distinct function in the teachings of Jesus. Believe me for my work's sake. You might not believe what I'm saying, but you see that the authentication of these things that I'm saying is found in the signs and the miracles which I do. There are three words which are prominent in the New Testament that have to do with a kind of a statement of miracles. One is a word that just simply means great power, a powerful deed. Now, it's the word dunamis. It's the word we get dynamic from, or dynamo. It's the word that dynamite comes from, dunamis. And basically, this is just saying that there is great power here. Now, sometimes that great power is seen as supernatural, and so it's translated as miracle. But sometimes it's just simply translated as power. The gospel, Paul says, is God's power unto salvation. Well, he uses this word dunamis. Now, there's another word. This word approaches miracles from a little different point of view. It's a wonder, it's a marvel, it's something that we see, that we feel, that we hear, that appeals to the senses, and it's referred to simply as a wonder. Teros is the word. T-E-R-A-S is the way we would spell it. But this is a description of some great and wonderful deed that has been done for which there is no explanation. John's favorite word, I will have to say it's my favorite word too, in looking at the miracles, is the word sign. I've said so many times, I've said so much in various times about this word, it's the word sign. And one of the things that John tries to show us is that the signs had a message. The signs pointed to something. The signs explains something about Jesus that nothing else would explain. And you've heard me mention this a number of times. Some people become so enthralled with the idea of miracles that they forget to read the sign. They forget what the miracle is for. It is a sign, John says. And then he says Jesus did many other signs that are not written in this book. But these are written, why? That you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and believing you may have life in his name. And so the miracles, again, were a fundamental part of the ministry and the message of Jesus Christ. Now, there's an interesting area, I think, that, particularly in our own time, that we ought not to overlook. I call these the spheres in which the miracles are worked. The categories, the types of miracles that Jesus performed. For example, Jesus performed miracles in reference to nature. This miracle, for example, walking on water. Jesus walked on the water. I don't know if you've ever tried that or not, but every time I've ever tried it, it just didn't work. It's just something that is against nature. You sink. But Jesus came walking on the water. Jesus commanded the winds to cease. And the great storm, calmed down. Well, this was a miracle of nature, showing Christ's power even over natural forces. And so his apostles said, even the winds and the waves obey him. Now, Jesus also worked miracles in reference to diseases. There are certain diseases and physical maladies that Jesus cured. He healed. He restored sight to the blind, for example. When a woman appealed to Jesus about her daughter being gravely ill, when a centurion came to Jesus and his servant was gravely ill, Jesus healed that person. Now, that healing was not an answer to prayer of these people or anything like that. Simply a statement of Jesus, which tells us this also: the power to work miracles, so far as Christ was concerned, the power to work miracles really was resident in Jesus Christ himself. It was not an answer to their prayers, although we are told to pray for our health and this sort of thing. But the thing that Jesus did, the things that Jesus did miraculously, those things were emitted from him personally. He had the power within himself. And then also the power to cast out demons. This is a very, I want to use the term mysterious. This is a very mysterious thing to us, because almost every time that a demon possessed a person in the Bible, it had a physical effect on him, but it was not something that Jesus addressed in reference to his spiritual needs. The demoniac who was in the tombs, they called him Legion, he had this supernatural power, it seems. He was able to break chains and all of this sort of thing. When Jesus healed him, cast out the demons, it was not in reference to his spiritual well-being. It was in reference to physical things. And then Jesus healed a boy who was he was possessed of a demon. We don't know really exactly what that was. And his father said, sometimes the demon tries to drown him and throws him in the water. It even tries to throw him into the fire. And can you do anything about this, was the question. And Jesus cast the demon out of that person. And then the demoniac that had at Gerson, he had the demon cast out of him, and they went into the swine, and the swine ran down the cliff and drowned in the sea. All sorts of things like this. And then Jesus also had power over death. He raised Lazarus from the dead. The son of the widow of Nain. He was being carried out of town, Luke tells us, to a burial. And Jesus paused and stopped them, and he raised the son from the dead. Well, why are those things important? I think one reason that they're important is that we do not see that in the claims of miracles today. Those who claim the power to work miracles today, you don't see them walk on the water. You don't see them calm a storm. You don't see them just speaking a word and someone in another city there or a far-off place is immediately healed. We don't see those things, but when we come to the biblical things, we see that this happened over and over in the time of Jesus. And so miracles, they took place in the normal activity of Christ. But now let's notice a couple of characteristics here of the miracles of Christ. The first thing is, Jesus never advertised his miracles. He never did have a sign up that says, "Come and hear the gospel and be healed." No, he didn't do that. People came to him to be healed, but Jesus did not advertise his healing. He performed many miracles, but he did not try to make this a separate part of his ministry. Instead, it was an integral part and a vital part of the message that he would come bringing to them. We need to remember that in New Testament time, paganism was the religion or religions, plural, of the Roman Empire. Now, although the Jews were not involved in the paganism, there were Gentiles, many Gentiles in the Roman army right there occupying Palestine. And so the idea of some of the pagan beliefs about miracles of their God ought really to be stopped, that we ought really to stop and consider those things for a moment. Now, in Roman and Greek mythology, way back, in time, prehistoric time, way back when the gods were very active and fighting each other in some cases and this sort of thing, and the gods were interacting with people mythologically, we have all kinds of miracles that took place, but they took place not in reference to people as we know them, but those things took place supposedly in legendary time. And so these things were mythological stories, fables and fabrications and things like that, which arose, but they did not arise in a historical framework. The miracles of Christ, on the other hand, arose in a historical framework. That is, among people who actually lived, who actually worked, who actually had families just like we do. The miracles, in a second thing about the miracles of Christ, these miracles were useful. What I mean by that is that the miracles of the Bible were not spectacular in the sense of making elephants fly or something of that nature. The miracles in biblical sense met human needs, not human curiosity, but human needs. Now you remember at the time of the trial of Jesus, something was said before Pilate about Galilee. And he says, "Oh, I can get rid of this fella." And so he sent him to Herod. Luke is the only one that tells us about this, but he sent him to Herod. Herod was tickled to death. Herod was so pleased because he said, "Maybe he'll do a magic trick for me." Well, that was not his exact words. "Maybe he will work a miracle for me." Jesus' miracles were not to satisfy the curiosity of people. They were instead a part of the message that Christ had. And he didn't just heal people. His miracles were in, as we said a moment ago, a variety of spheres or a variety of operations which he performed. Then the miracles were instantaneous. There are two possible exceptions to this in the New Testament. One was where Jesus cursed a fig tree. And he left the fig tree, but the next day they came by and the fig tree had withered. And so this was kind of a delayed reaction, it seemed, to the cursing of Christ of this fig tree. And then there was another delay where a man went and washed, and he came not seeing, but Jesus said, "What do you see?" He says, "Well, I see men, they look like trees walking." And Jesus then completed the miracle. And so those were the only two really delays that we have in the miracles of Christ. Today, many people who claim miracles, they go home and pray and wait for God to heal you. Well, this is not the same as what we have in the miracles of Jesus Christ. Another idea that I think is very important here is the fact that Jesus never took up a collection for his miracles. There was no cost. There was not the implication of any cost. The only obligation was, follow me. Believe what I'm saying. Act on what I'm saying. And so the power was resident in Christ. It was not something that came gradually at some other juncture or some other time. The miracles then accentuated the message of Christ. What about faith and miracles? Yes, a few times faith was required. Do you have the faith to be healed? Well, this was very seldom. This very seldom played any kind of part in the miracles of Christ. But we must admit that a few times that was the way of it. Now, today, faith is an essential. Stop and think of how many miracles Jesus worked where faith was either not possible or faith was never required. The healing of the raising of Lazarus from the dead, nothing is said about Lazarus' faith. He was dead. But Jesus raised him from the dead. The same with the widow of Nain that I spoke of just a moment ago. And so we have a number of situations like that. All of the miracles miracles in reference to nature, the calming of the storm, faith was not something that was involved there. As a matter of fact, after he had calmed the storm and the disciples were so amazed by this, what was Jesus' statement? "Oh, you of little faith." Faith did not play a part in the miracles so that it was required before Jesus could work a miracle. And so faith sometime, although mentioned, very seldom is anything said that would indicate that this is a requirement. A few times, yes. Ordinarily, not. What was the people's response to the miracles of Christ? Well, the response basically was this. People who wanted to believe, believed. People who did not want to believe, did not believe. You see, we generally believe in things that we want to believe in. Somebody asked me one day, why do you believe in God? And I said, well, one big reason is because I want to believe in God. That isn't the reason, but that is a reason why I believe in God. And so people in the days of Christ, when Jesus worked miracles, the Pharisees were insulted and turned against him. And although they said a great miracle had been wrought, when Peter worked a miracle, a great miracle has been wrought here, we can't deny that. Still, they didn't believe in Christ. Why? Because the message of Christ was contrary to what they wanted to hear. That's the reason that I say, if we want to believe in the miracles, we're quite different than those who do not want to believe in miracles. Why? Because somehow or another, what I believe plays a very important role in what I see and how I respond to what I see. When I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, a good friend of mine there in the congregation I was preaching for, He was in the real estate business. And he had to make a trip across parts of Tennessee to another city, and he carried one of his clients with him. And after they got where they were going, the client said, you know, all the way over here, I was counting how many bars we ran into, or how many bars we passed. Did you know how many bars we passed? And my friend said, no, I don't. But I can tell you how many church buildings we passed. And the whole idea was that so much of the time we see what we're looking for. We notice the things that are attractive to us because of something. And so it's very important that we see the miracles of Christ as a manifestation of something, not only of his power, but of the power of the message that he was bringing. And so part of this mission, part of this message of Christ was involved in the miracles that we read about. What should we say? For this man has done many signs. That was in Acts chapter 4. After Peter had worked a miracle, and they said, yes, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to react to it? How are we going to respond to it? And the power of miracles is that the message of Christ, the authentication of all that he claimed, is right there before us. We can be like the Pharisees and turn away from it and say, yes, he did some wonderful signs, he did some miraculous works, but we don't want to believe in him. And so they killed him. There's a great contrast between the modern claims of miracles and the miracles of Jesus Christ. Now, what does all of this mean to us? I think it ought to mean to us a number of things. And number one is that the miracles, although evidence of the divinity of Christ, they are also part of his message. And he is saying to us in the miracles two or three things. One is, I am who I claim to be. This is what John talks about in speaking the miracles as signs. A second thing is, I am a compassionate, loving, caring person. God is a compassionate, loving, and caring person. Those are two very important things, I think, that we see in the miracles of Christ. And when we see his power, and we see the concern that he had for the people around him, there's a third and most important thing, and that is this. This man who had all of this power, he gave his life for you and for me. He had that kind of love. Now, he had the power not to do it. He even prayed in Gethsemane, Father, take this cup from me. But then he said, not my will, but your will be done. Yes, he could have refused to die for us. He had that capacity, but if he had used that capacity, there would be no hope for any of the rest of us, would there? And so the miracles of Christ turn out to be very, very important for us. Very important that we accept the miracles of Christ and that we learn from the miracles of Christ that Christ's message is one of love, concern, and compassion.